Welcome back. This is Tim and Julie Harris. And of course, this is Real Estate Coaching Radio. And we've got a really fantastic episode for you today. And the name of today's show is Boom Alert, Make Housing Great Again. And if you didn't listen to the podcast that we did yesterday when we were interviewing Keith Jensen talking about the new housing policies that we're, I think, mostly assured that are going to be coming out from the Trump administration. We're going to cover a lot of those again today, but I want you to go back and listen to yesterday's podcast so you can get the more finite details. Keith really did drill down on Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and some of the other things. We are 100% confident that there's going to be a big announcement coming from the Trump administration that is going to most likely be called Make Housing Great Again. And we do believe that this is going to be a new golden age of housing that is going to last a generation. Wow, that was a lot of hyperbole in one quick sentence, wasn't it? But the truth is there's a lot of reasons to believe that over the next 25 years, that is arguably what a generation is, that there's going to be an unprecedented housing boom like the United States, at the very least, has never experienced before. So you are in the right place at the right time. And yes, real estate's been in a bit of a depression for the last 3 years, all the reasons that everyone knows about. But all those reasons are going to be going away rapidly. And there's going to be a return to focus on housing to the extent that Julie and I believe that over the next generation, next 25 years, that housing is going to be the largest single growth opportunity in the American economy and is going to be the biggest driver for GDP. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars are going to go into building new homes. So if that doesn't get you motivated, then the next 7 points we're about to deliver to you will. And if you want today's notes, as I'm sure you do, make sure you're subscribing to harrisrealestatedaily.com. It is our daily newsletter, thus the name, where all of our notes are printed. And you can go there anytime, download the notes, and listen to the podcast as well. And we do publish the video of the podcast, which some of you are watching right now on YouTube there every day as well. So make sure you go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. And there are a lot of special features that are only in the newsletter for newsletter subscribers. And the newsletter is free, by the way. So you want to be reading the extra articles and content that our team and Julie and I are directly creating just for newsletter subscribers. So just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe. And remember, when you do, you got to put in your email address in the little bar. Takes no time. And then you got to pop over to your normal email, and then you got to double opt in, confirming that you actually want the newsletter. So that is all I have for all of you guys today. And let's, Julie, move on to your introduction and point number one. These are going to be, if these guys have open minds and they're setting aside political biases, and they're actually thinking, I think, holistically about the points you and I are about to make, they're going to feel the same level of excitement as you and I do.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. We always like to start off with a little bit of a mindset check. And on our podcast, we are committed to, as we lovingly call it, facting you. And we always like to give you our sources, our resources, stats and facts, and just sticking to what's happening. And of course, we're going to have our opinion. We like to have a lot of enthusiasm for all of you and for the market, but we're basing it on fact. And we do look for counterfacts. And when we find them, we're going to share that with you. So I'm glad that you mentioned setting aside any political outlook. We're going to stick with these facts. So starting with number one, you mentioned it. The biggest boom in history is already here. We're already on the edge of that. We've got micro points A, B, and C. I am using my notes, guys. So number A, we're entering a historic 25-year housing boom driven by demographics, demand, and Trump-era policies. Point B, here's a stat for you. Why do we believe that it's going to have huge growth? Because we're currently 4.5 million homes short versus demand. And that's according to NAR just from last quarter last year. So new construction is set to explode. Point C is this spells opportunity for you, our listeners, agents. This is your chance to ride a wealth building wave with no crash risk and potentially for a longer amount of years, a generation, as you said, Tim, 25 years, versus some of these mini booms that we had, like during the pandemic, that was basically a 2.5-year boom. So this one could stand to be longer. And you mentioned setting aside politics. One of the things that I do to keep up with on all this stuff is not just whitehouse.gov, because that does all the executive orders. And it's not like this is my opinion of the order. It's literally that's the order, and that's what we're asking for, as well as the reporting some of the different events and speaking things where they roll these things out. But also I discovered HUD.gov is reporting on all of these different events as well. Did you know that, for example, last week there was a big event on the Washington Mall which was called The American Home is the American Dream. That was a big event where they were addressing things like the inventory shortage that we just talked about here in point number one, and talking about new construction and all the different things that HUD is working on. So there's a lot of ways to stay up to speed on this that just sticks to the facts. Back to you.
Well, so 2 points to that. Number one, the two previous housing booms, I think, going back in time, the housing boom from that led to the crash, and the one that I think we experienced as a result of COVID and the really low interest rates, those were both arguably speculative housing booms. People are getting into FOMO because they wanted to make money. We're not talking about a speculative housing boom. What we're talking about is a generational shift that essentially that's what's happening. Demographics, as long as you've got demographics, and it's very predictable to expect a housing boom to happen. But Julie also said this secondary thing, and this is really important, that new construction is going to definitely be leading the way to the creation of new supply. And so new construction is going to be coming in all forms, all different forms. You're going to see, and Julie's mentioning some of the governments. You guys, if you've been in real estate for more than a blink, you know that it's hard to get, for example, a modular home finance through Fannie Freddie, or it's hard to get different types of anything other than a stick-built house finance using government-backed loans, which 90% plus of all mortgages are. Well, okay, so a couple of things we're going to see happen. We're going to see Fannie and Freddie, and Julie's got this as a point, but is going to be officially out of conservatorship soon. You're going to see other big entities like JP Morgan get into the same businesses in Fannie and Freddie. How do I make this practical for all of you? When you go to get a loan when you go to Larry the lender and he goes to his, and you're bringing your buyer to that Larry the lender is going to be able to offer you essentially a mortgage that is going to be following the guidelines and the rules set out by Fannie and Freddie. And so Fannie and Freddie's are going to determine the minimum interest rates. They're going to determine the minimum down payments. They're going to decide what places they want to borrow or lend on. They don't want to lend on. If you're in Florida right now, you may have discovered that some of your the condos in the area have been blacklisted. All that really truly means is that Fannie and Freddie won't back the mortgages on those. And so the lenders aren't going to want to lend on those properties. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to really get any sort of reasonable financing on those types of units. Well, what's going to happen is Fannie and Freddie are going to be forced to become more competitive. You're going to see JP Morgan and others are going to get into the same business as Fannie and Freddie, as has been in the case prior to conservatorship. Mortgage products, you're going to see the cost, more competition drives costs down. You're going to see the cost of obtaining a mortgage and the monthly payment be reduced, not just from interest rates, but from all the extra fees. Like when you guys go to the gas station and you look to see how many taxes are on each gallon of gas you're pumping in. It's very similar to when you make a mortgage payment. And you don't know that, for example, I think it was 50 basis points of all loan originations go to Fannie and Freddie. And then you have, things like PMI insurance, right? PMI insurance is largely a function of something that's as a result of no competition for Fannie and Freddie. I know some of this stuff is very obscure, but here I'm just, Julie and I have been in this business for 2 decades, and we were in the business when Fannie and Freddie actually had competition, and their availability of mortgage products was extraordinary versus what we're experiencing now. We have the United States right now, until the conservatorship, release of conservatorship happens, has the largest socialized housing in the world right now. That's actually what's happened as a result of what the Obama administration did. And that's all being changed right now. And it's going to be part of Make Housing Great Again. And absolutely, it should be obvious to everyone, Bill Pelluti was appointed the head of, I think it was
FHFA.
Yeah.
Pulte. Yeah.
Pulte, right. And he is where's that? Why does that name sound familiar? Oh yeah, one of the nation's largest building families. And so clearly Trump administration has their eyes on building new homes that are going to not just be stick built. You're going to see modular homes. You're going to see homes that are 3D printed homes. All kinds of different new interesting products are going to come out, and so on. So there's going to be an enormous demand. There already is an increasing demand for new homes, and the new homes that are going to be built are going to have ready availability of all kinds of new mortgage products and all kinds of new styles and types of housing. These are all very exciting things. You're going to want to make sure you stay on the forefront of all these things.
100%. It is definitely exciting times. This is more opportunity, not less. And you mentioned a second ago, point number 2, demographics. That's a great buyer pipeline, excuse me, in particular. Keep in mind that between millennials and Gen Z, That's 80 million people in those combined generations. They're in their prime home buying years, and they've been held back. Those that didn't jump in during the pandemic years, they've been on the sidelines ever since the rates went up a bit. Excuse me. Millennials, in fact, drove 54% of purchases in 2023. So they've already demonstrated their willingness and the demand, and not all 80 million bought anything. Remember that we had, years of 6 million sales. Those were not all 100% millennials, of course, and then we've had a couple of years of only 4 million sales. Well, there's still 60 million people left that might be interested in buying. And along with that, boomers are downsizing, but still we have short supply. There's been some reports about why that is. There was some allusion to this silver tsunami idea that we were going to have mass inventory because all the boomers were going to sell their houses, when in fact, we've had the VRBO effect instead. And in many markets, they just kept them and or are cohabitating with their kids. I know a lot of my coaching clients have been having recent sales of mixed generation purchases. That's another loan product that we're going to be seeing coming out. So, for example, in our research, there was a Charlotte couple that had 25 offers when they did decide to sell their Booma era home. Okay, so what's the ratio of supply and demand? Obviously, it's still askew.
Well, you didn't
Go
give the
ahead.
rest of the details on that. So they had 25 offers when they marketed the house as basically being a multi-generational house. And that's how but we're saying basically the same thing. These guys are getting the idea. So I did some homework on over the weekend, and I wanted to know how out of check the affordability of homes is to the average income. And it's way out of check. Like it's the average income in the United States. Traditionally, you've been able to, I think the average income right now is 75,000. And that means the average home should cost no more than 3 or 4x the average income. That's been traditionally what it's been for a long time. And now it's 5 or 6x. And the reason for that isn't the boomers. The reason for that isn't all these other things that, people try to throw around as political hot potatoes. The reason is because we have lack of inventory and people don't want to sell for a whole host of reasons. And so, at the end of the day, new construction is going to save the day. Let's go ahead and move on, Julie.
Well, you talked a lot about point number 3 a second ago with Fannie and Freddie being unleashed and creating an easier sales and mortgage environment. But along with that, you mentioned if PMI vanishes, that's typically $100 to $300 a month savings. And as you go up market, of course, that becomes $700 or $800 a month. If that goes away, what kind of purchasing power does that give to that same buyer? It's usually somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 more, depending on the price range. So that's something that can make things more affordable. There's also been some discussion about bringing back a 40-year loan. So obviously, stretching payments out drives payments down. And of course, what we're all waiting for with the privatization of Fannie and Freddie, lower rates projected by JP Morgan to be 5.5 to 6.5%. And we're already in the higher sixes right now. We've seen it come down for the past 6 weeks. So we're going the right direction. But so if you combine those things, more mortgage products, more inventory, which we really need, the builders are going to fill in some of that, maybe the lack of PMI, and maybe stretching out of payments, then we start to tackle some of that affordability issue. Now, go ahead.
What you're saying is really important. I hope you're reading your points, but let's make sure we're breaking this down so these guys can clearly understand. I mean, here, I don't think we have a pricing problem. The home affordability is the problem, but home affordability doesn't mean the houses are overpriced. Oh, what am I talking about? It sounds confusing, right? We have a payment problem. If you had a house payment, that you could afford, you don't really care what the price is, especially if that house that you're buying is rapidly appreciating, if not inflating in value. So whether the house should be right now 300,000, but it happens to be almost 600,000, if the payment on that $600,000 house was something that didn't, cause you hardship, do you really care if it's a $600,000 house? You don't, especially when you consider that house is probably increasing in value, inflating in value by at least 5% per year. Free money, right? And in some cases, if the interest rate on the mortgage is low enough, the interest that you pay on the mortgage is completely covered by the appreciation, the inflation of the house in that particular calendar year. So I hope you guys are thinking about this. So we do have a home affordability problem, but it's not because houses are overpriced. I get it. You could argue that, but if interest rates were lower and the cost to obtain, let alone maintain a mortgage were lower, you wouldn't have anybody complaining about pricing. So the pricing thing is a little bit of classical political class warfare that's trying to sneak in and trying to make it really stoke the flames of have and have nots and class warfare and all the rest of it. Okay. So be very mindful of that. We don't have a pricing problem. We don't have overpriced homes. That's a bunch of political Mickey Mouse. We have a payment problem. And when Fannie and Freddie come out of conservatorship and all the other associated fees are essentially reduced, you're going to see a dramatic decrease in house payments. And that's going to allow more homes to starting to transact. You're obviously going to see where those people, what are those people going to be primarily buying? We believe in many cases it's going to be new construction. Right now, new construction makes up, what is it, Julie, 20% of all home sales per year, something like that?
It's 31% of available inventory, but it's between like 20 and 23% or so of actual closings. And some of that disparity is because many of those houses are still being built.
Right. So if you assume that we have a shortage of 4 to 5 million homes right now, and we assume that most of those are going to be from this new construction, you're going to see new construction. Let's say right now it's at the 20 to 23%. It's going to probably go up to 30 to 40%, and it's going to be at that level for years. So new construction in many markets, and I'm looking forward to getting the next points because we really drilled down on that.
Yes. Well, so point number 4, Trump and the Trump administration's vision is to have some new boom towns. And for example, federal land accounts for 28% of the land in the US, almost 30% of the land the government owns. That's huge. I mean, anybody that's ever flown from coast to coast sees what we're talking about there.
Well, hold on. Let's stop off there, Julie. Okay. It wasn't just the Trump administration. Elon Musk is doing the same thing.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos is doing the same thing. And we don't talk in our notes here about tariffs. But tariffs, again, you guys got to be mindful of all this. We look at the positive effects of tariffs, and we've written about this. And Julie and I put a long form article on our newsletter about this and did some podcasts about it. Here's the reality as it pertains to real estate. You can argue that the cost of building construction supplies is going to increase, and you're probably right. That means that the domestic producers of wood and whatnot that we're now getting mostly from Canada, they're going to basically have an advantage. And that's going to, I think, over maybe a year or two, bring the prices down on new construction supplies. But let's move past the new construction argument of having, inflation having a detrimental effect. What the tariffs have done, and have done in less than 30 days from being announced, is they are forcing these big international conglomerate companies that make things to build facilities here. The number of companies that have decided to build their huge facilities to manufacture, everyone talks about cars, but it's also microchips. It's also about, just everything you can possibly imagine. Washers and dryers. I heard something about South Korea moving like Samsung is moving a big manufacturing facility. Everybody and their brother is going to be building their stuff in the United States. Why? Because the United States is by far, and there's no comparison, the biggest consumer of consumer goods on planet Earth. So if you make something at scale, United States is your primary customer. There's no let's not even debate that. So if you don't want to have to suffer the 20% plus tariffs, you're going to be making your products in the United States. And you saw recently, it was France that, started to get into tariff wars with the United States over wine. And they said, well, United States is going to raise we're going to raise our tariffs on U.S. imported wines by 50%. And just all this back and forth. And of course, the mainstream media picked that up that, they're trying to politicize it. So Julie and I went to Grok AI and we did a little homework, and we found out that essentially if you look at the tariffs that have been on imported, if you're in Italy or France, if you look at the cost of a bottle of wine imported from California in Italy or France, that bottle of wine is usually 30 to 40% more expensive than an equivalent bottle made in France or Italy. Whereas if you go to United States, the imported wine from France or Italy costs roughly the same as the wine from California. That's because they tariff the hell out of our products, and they've been doing it for a long period of time. So all we're doing is we're basically matching the tariffs that they've been charging us, and we're tariffing them the same amount. Now,
reciprocal tariffs. That's what that is.
That's basically what it is. But you're going to see as a result, and I know I'm stepping on your next point, but that's okay. You're going to see as a result of these manufacturing facilities being built in the United States, massive amounts of jobs, massive amounts of new construction. And what's really exciting is Julie was mentioning some of these parts of the country, like where we're from in the flyover states. Those areas are going to be the new boom areas because they're the ones where all this manufacturing is going to essentially be coming out of the ground. So these, again, this is a generational housing boom that's going to be unlike the housing, I would call them again, what we were experiencing prior, where it was just people being opportunistic and trying to make money off houses and flip houses. This is not that. This is the recreation of the American dream of owning a home as we know it.
Yeah, there's not a lot of talk about flipping and investors and stuff like that. It's all about, obtaining the American dream, right?
Yep.
So I think that's really important to pay attention to. And I think, action points on this, listeners, if I was in your shoes, okay, selling real estate for a living, I would pay attention and I would be asking my AI, my Grok or Chat GPT, I would ask on a virtually daily basis, tell me more about the manufacturing and the companies and what's going into my town and within a 50-mile radius of my town, because I'm thinking about relocation. I'm thinking about talking to the builders and seeing where they're planning. Because remember, one of the things that happened over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years is the builders have gobbled up tons of land surrounding a lot of, like you think between, say, Charlotte and Asheville, there's builders that own tons of land that you wouldn't necessarily know it because they don't have their signs and their models up yet. But they hear that, there's new manufacturing coming into town. Somebody moved their plant. They're going to be anticipating that. So talk to the builders, talk to your AI and find out what's happening in your town and become involved in that. Become the go-to resource between knowing about the new construction and maybe making some connections in the relocation world. What would you think about that?
Well, no, I agree. If you're living in a state right now, here's a way to predict the momentum. If you're living in a state right now where people are leaving, that trend's going to continue. If you're living in a state right now where it's hard to, where you hear people belly aching about building and getting permits and the red tape and all the rest of it, that trend's going to continue. If you're in a state that has a large state taxes, that trend's going to continue. So if you want to know where the growth is going to be, look to see like Ohio, where Julie and I are from. Vic Ramaswamy, I can't say his last name.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Okay, yeah. All right. Anyway, so he's planning on running for governor from Ohio or for Ohio, and one of his things is he's going to get rid of the state of Ohio income tax. And there's 11 states in the nation right now that have no state taxes, and those 11 states almost. It's totally predictable, are the ones that have the fastest growing populations. Not necessarily because people are just trying to move there to save their state taxes, but because businesses are moving there, because those states are also being very competitive with other states to get the new to get these big new businesses that are forming or that are being brought from, say, South Korea, like I mentioned before, car manufacturing from Germany. All these things are coming to the United States. And these states are saying, okay, we know where the long-term growth is going to be. We need to make it as attractive as possible for these companies to be spending their billions and billions of dollars here. And also think about this. When you see, like if you go to, was it Greenville, South Carolina, and you look to see where BMW is building cars. BMW builds cars there, obviously employs thousands of people or however many people, but you're also seeing that whole region is also, full of other businesses that are there to service BMW and to service the people that work in BMW. You're talking about the obvious things, the roofers and the candlestick makers and the pizza delivery guys and all the rest of it. But how about all the manufacturing facilities that have opened up there to supply their products to BMW for the sake of making their cars? The guys that make the windshields, for example, the guys that, make wheels, maybe, I don't know, but you got the point. So when you hear about these manufacturing facilities being built in the United States, you can kind of visualize a big ass warehouse. But you got to realize that creates an enormous boom town. It's not just the manufacturing and people are driving there to build their widgets every day. All these other thousands and thousands and thousands of people are employed because of, guess what? Tariffs. And that would have only happened, all this would have only happened if basically, essentially Trump threatened tariffs and has put some in place. This is going to be short term. It's going to be painful because it's going to cause some inflation in some cases. It might cause even some hardship regionally. But long term, this is going to put the United States back in a very powerful position globally. And it's going to, again, create an enormous, huge demand. One of the other reasons for housing. And this is not something you'll hear anyone talking about. I've never heard anyone making with the point I just made, other than Julie and I, that, under what we predict will be called Make Housing Great Again, you're definitely going to see the planned creation of new manufacturing-based cities and towns. Some of them are existing. It might be Springfield, Ohio. Others of them you never heard before, and they're going to be
Yeah.
sprouting out of the ground where right now it's a soybean field. That's what's
Yeah.
going to happen.
They haven't been invented yet. Remember, there's a contest on to create the next 10 cities. That's something that I'm watching and we'll report on as that contest comes to fruition. The contest had to do with innovation, obviously location, the effectiveness and efficiency of what it costs to build there, lack of regulation or too much regulation. All these things go into building a new town. I mean, how exciting is that, right? And then how do you, some of these are potentially going to be on federal land that's maybe kind of far yonder. Well, how do you handle the transportation? Maybe people will be more remote work. Maybe the whole thing will be outfitted by Starlink. Maybe they'll get there by train. Who knows? So that's something to keep an eye on and certainly spells more housing good news. And that kind of plays into our point number 4, which we've talked about a little bit, that construction boom to relieve the inventory problem of 4 to 5 million homes. Think about how many that is when you look at the fact that we're on track to sell about 4 million homes. We're that many off of what we could be doing. Could we actually have years in the future where we're selling 7 or 8 million a year once some of this stuff is built? I think that's an interesting thought. You know, when things were fast and furious, remember during the pandemic years when we had multiple offers on everything and everything sold in 22 seconds, that was a symptom of not having inventory. How many homes would have sold during COVID if we had had inventory? Would it be 2
Yeah.
or 3 times? It's
Well,
interesting to think about.
so this is a good time probably to talk about some of the other things that we know are brewing because we're thinking about investing in some of these companies. You guys heard of Case-Shiller-Weiss? Well, I'm sorry, Case-Shiller Index. Well, it's actually originally was called the Case-Shiller-Weiss Index. Weiss is a guy named Alan Weiss, and Alan actually is one of our neighbors. And Julie and I are thinking about investing with him. And one of his concepts of one of his businesses, which we really like, is that there will be essentially, just bear with me here. So the challenge is going to be that on a say $600,000 house, you're going to have to come up with whatever the down payment's going to be. Call it 10%, call it 5%. You got to come up with, it's 30,000 or 60,000, and not the easiest thing to do. So what is going to hypothetically happen is that you're going to see a investor, and call it what you will, that's going to take an equity interest in your house as not as a mortgage, but as a partner. And so they're going to give you all or part of your down payment. And then they're going to essentially ride up the appreciation on the house. And when you go to sell it and you choose when you're going to sell it, you don't have to pay it this month back monthly. This isn't a debt. This isn't a loan. All they're doing is taking an equity interest in your property. And when you go to sell it, they know statistically you're going to sell that house in 7 years. And the house that you paid 600 for is now worth, let's say, 850, 900,000. Well, they're going to get a return on their investment that they originally put in of that 60 grand. How the math works doesn't matter, but you guys get the point. So you're going to be seeing more affordable payments. You're going to be seeing alternative ways to come up with down payments. And all of this is going to be happening to essentially add the most fuel you can possibly imagine to an already inevitable housing boom like we've never seen before.
Well, let's talk about our next point because all of this enthusiastic talk leads some to say, what about a potential crash with all of this, right? But we would conjecture based on fact that there is no crash risk because remember that 40% of homes are actually mortgage free. That's 56 million homes in the country. And 80% of the rest of them that do have mortgages are under 5% interest rate. So people generally don't default on these types of situations. Now, you can't default on a house that's paid off. There's no mortgage to default on. But the rest of the people who have 5% interest rate or less, they're pretty attached to that. And remember that they have a whole lot of equity as well. There is no this time is exactly like last time because it's not exactly like last time. People didn't have that kind of equity and they weren't sitting on 5% interest rates. So
What
we
would
could go on, but go ahead.
Okay, so a housing boom or a housing bust is only happens from lack of demand. We know there's no lack of demand. We just proven that to you. Hopefully you're paying attention. So there's not a lack of demand. A housing bust is made from happens when somebody can't afford a house payment. Okay, so they can't afford their house payment, but most people in the United States, if they've owned their home for 3 years, have at least 50% equity in their homes. So even if they can't make their house payment, they can call up their lender and they can ask for a forbearance on their house payment while the house is for sale. And every lender on planet Earth is going to happily do that. And then the missed interest payments will just be deducted from whatever they will receive at closing, and
Yes.
that won't be a hit on their credit. So if your worst case scenario is there's going to be mass unemployment and people are going to have to allow their homes to go into foreclosure, why would they? It doesn't even make any sense, because if you go into foreclosure, you're going to be subject to all kinds of expenses and fees and Mickey Mouse, and you may or may not get any portion of your equity back after the foreclosure sale. So it just doesn't make sense. And the people that want us to believe that there's a potential for a housing crash they're not even remotely dealing with the facts. And Julie said something else, and I'm going to round the numbers up. And Julie, you need to restate these so we're
Mhm.
clearer, because I know you condense these points, and maybe they're not that congruent with your condensing. Okay. So of all the houses and of all the single family homes in the United States, roughly half of them are paid off with no mortgage. The ones that have a mortgage have an average interest rate of something like less than 3.5%. And of those that have a mortgage, they have on average a 50% equity in their homes. So you have people that have 100% equity, or you have people that have very low interest rates on their loans that have 50% equity. Who the hell is going to default in that scenario? Nobody is. So again, if you have somebody that's trying to feed fear and loathing into your mind that there's going to be a housing crash, you immediately know, A, they're ignorant, they're frankly just lying to you in hopes of getting you to, throw in $50 to put your name on some sort of foreclosure BPO Mickey Mouse list.
List, right?
Yeah,
Some
exactly.
magic list. That's right. And so I'm glad that you brought up some other facts. So, as people want to say, oh, the run up is going to be just like the crash before, let's define what underwater means. People default when they're underwater, right? They're upside down. A lot of our listeners never lived through that. So, what does that mean? It means that you owe more than your house is worth. In other words, if you were to sell it today at its market value, the seller would owe money back to the lender to get rid of that house, sometimes more than the buyer would take to end their down payment.
Let
That's
me
the
interject.
definition of underwater.
Let me drop something in there, okay?
Sure.
Because this is also important, because people don't know this. When
Mhm.
Julie and I sold real estate, it was not unusual at all for the homeowner to walk away with nothing from the sale of their home. In some cases, have to bring a small check to closing. That was called normal. And it was normal to buy a house when Julie and I, when we were selling real estate for at least, I'd say, the first half of our career, for that to occur. So when you sat down with the seller, if they hadn't been in their house in our market for probably 5 years, they almost surely were going to lose money on that house, because the inflation rate on real estate, you guys call it appreciation, but it's inflation, was so small and this is back when interest rates, a normal interest rate was 6.5, 7.5%. So you're looking at, essentially, they didn't pay much down on their mortgage. They probably didn't put much down payment down, and the house didn't inflate or appreciate much in value. So when they went to sell that house, if they'd not been in the house for 5 years, they had zero equity. Why am I telling you this? Because just because somebody has zero equity doesn't mean that they walk away. And that's something else that I hear morons saying. They say that, blah, 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 people have no equity. Well, if you bought at the wrong time in certain markets, you might have no equity in your home because the house may have depreciated or may not be worth what you paid for it. I know there's little pockets in Austin and maybe in San Francisco that are like that, tiny, 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 right? So the moral of the story here is those people aren't going to walk away. Why? Well, aside from the, ethical, moral aspects to it, if anyone still cares about any of that, they're not going to walk away because they still have to make a house payment in the form of rent. So the rent payment that they would have would be the same, if not more, than what their mortgage payment is. And they know real estate over time might, in their market, go up and go down. Most of the country is very stable. And they know if they wait it out and they continue to make the payment, even if they have zero or even slightly negative equity now, they're going to be right as rain. That's another reason. So anytime you hear these people saying, oh, as soon as people have negative equity, they immediately go into default, it's just not true. And don't believe anybody that tells you that.
Right. They might not have any distress at all. They just had a small down payment and bought last year.
Yeah,
That does not
exactly.
automatically mean that they are, distressed and going to default. And just to put some facts, excuse me, behind this, in 2008, 26% of people were underwater, right? They were upside down. And we didn't have 40 to 50% of the, country with paid off mortgages either. So those were some very important things. You know what the underwater rate is right now? It's less than 3% anywhere in the country, less than 3%. So that's not anything. That is not like this time is like last time. The other huge thing that people forget, Tim, and then we'll wrap this one up, is that unlike going through that crash, we were coaching back then. Okay. We remember very clearly those times, as do many of our listeners. Okay. Lenders did not have any idea how to handle short sales, foreclosures. What was the trajectory? There was no system. That's why everything took forever. That's why short sale got the nickname of a long sale, right?
What Julia's saying is back when the market started, the wheels came off the wagon in 2007. We came out with a short sale program. And why did we know how to teach agents how to do short sales? Because when we sold real estate, we had to know how to do short sales. So we took our knowledge that we learned actually having done short sales and teaching coaching clients how to do short sales. And we launched the nation's first short sale coaching program. And that was back in like 2000, May or June of 2007. Yeah. And then there were a whole bunch of others came out and they all basically copied us. But why am I telling you this? Is because the short sale vehicle or the short sale system, there was no system inside most of these banks. So you had to know how to negotiate with them. Nowadays, you call up the lender. If you have anyone in this situation, I just want you to remember I told you this. Tell them to call their servicer. Tell them that they need a forbearance. Ask them to get at least a 12-month forbearance. The lender will do it over the phone with one form. It's called a hardship forbearance. They won't have to make their payment for, maybe they'll only get 6, or they might say 6. And then if you still have your problem, call us back and we'll give you an extra 12. People do this all the time. Fannie and Freddie made it so that the servicers have to provide people hardship forbearances. Health problems, all kinds of things happen. Life happens, and they don't want people to go into default. So if you have anybody, or if you're experiencing that type of thing, I just told you how to solve your own problem. If you're in a listing presentation and the seller is experiencing hardship and they don't know what the hell to do, I just told you how to solve their problem. Mm-hmm. And that does give you a very competitive edge when it comes to being their listing agent. And I do need to mention here, Julie, if you're not yet in Premier Coaching, you love the material you're getting. Julie and I are giving you guys high level information that's about what's going to happen in the markets over the next, we think, 25 years. We're telling you this because we want you to feel optimistic. We're telling you this because we want you to use this information to then educate and train maybe it's your real estate brokerage, maybe it's your team. How about this, the consumers in your marketplace? Because you're going to have to be doing a lot of, I think, pulling against the politicized negative housing rhetoric. Because just because Trump came out with it, damn well all the countervailing folks, and especially in mainstream media, are going to start saying it'll never work, and they're going to come up with a bunch of different reasons, and it's going to try to keep people pessimistic about housing. Because when housing does, and by the way, I don't think anybody could screw up housing right now, because frankly, the demographics that Julie and I pointed out in point number 1 and point number 2. So whoever the president was, there was going to be a generational housing boom. So I just want to make that clear. We're not playing politics with you right now. But what you are about to experience is a generational housing boom. And what you are going to need to do is educate yourself on this, because that's the best thing you can be doing. And what a better way for you. If you've been in the business for a while, if you're new in real estate, if you're thinking about getting into real estate, if you thought you were at the peak of your career, before you decide to call it the peak of your career, maybe you think about hitting hard reset and going to another elevation altogether. That's what Premier Coaching is all about. Julie and I recognize the fact that we're at the very beginning stages of a generational housing boom. Generation is 25 years. We're talking about 2025 through 2050. That's what we're going to be experiencing. All the reasons that we're mentioning, these 7 points we mentioned today and more, you've got to be getting yourself educated. You've got to be getting yourself mentally prepared, because your greatest opportunity to help people and make money, make more money than you can possibly imagine, you haven't even experienced it yet. You haven't even come close to what we're about to experience in virtually every market in the United States and a lot of other countries as well. So you want to absolutely join Premier Coaching. Go to premiercoaching.com, and there's no risk to you joining Premier Coaching. You can join Premier Coaching for free. And yes, that does include a daily semi-private coaching call with a Harris certified coach. So absolutely positively join Premier Coaching. Go to premiercoaching.com, or you can always text the word Premier to 47372 and we'll text you back a link to join. You need the education. Hopefully you're getting the motivation. And now it's time for you to take your business and your mindset to the next level. You haven't heard any information like this from anybody else, have you? Well, it's because Julie and I are realizing that we too are at the beginning of a generational housing boom. And we are doing the same things we're asking all of you guys to do. We're doing it ourselves. We've obviously been educating ourselves about what's about to happen. And we are indeed preparing ourselves and our business for what we know we're all about to experience. Do the same. Join Premier Coaching and just go to premiercoaching.com. Click the link below in the show description or just text the word Premier to 47372.
Yeah, so our final wrap-up point is what you just said, accept the fact that we are starting a 25-year generational housing boom. That's great. That's some of you guys are at the beginning of your careers. Some of you, you'll round out your careers. That's great. So rates could hit 4.5 to 5.5%. And a lot of studies have shown over the past year to 18 months, as soon as they're about 6.5%, mortgage purchase applications go through the roof. So we've already shown that it doesn't even have to get down. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, if it was only 4.5% again, it might not get to be quite that low, but if it's in 5.5 to 6.5, that should do the trick. Here's another point. I'm going to do a podcast coming up on this, excuse me, which is how to turn renters into owners, because we have all of those millennials that are still renting, 80 million people who have yet to purchase. And we have proof where we have anywhere on a slower market, we've got 2 or 3 offers for every sale. There's still markets. I have coaching calls every week where people have still 10 to 12 offers. And there was the example from our research in Charlotte. Somebody had over 20 offers still. So how do you navigate those bidding wars? That's another future podcast we're going to be talking about. So it's not just bringing you, these are the facts. We want you to be enthusiastic. This was largely a mindset and fact-based podcast so that you can counteract some of the crazy headlines and news shows that you might see.
We hear it too, Julie.
Yeah.
On reputable sources. You and I listen to
That's right.
was it Daily Wire every day? You
Mm-hmm.
know, we listen to that every morning, and they had some half-baked kook on.
Right.
That was
And
an
we generally
economist.
like that show, but they interviewed somebody that was all doom and gloom, but it
Yep.
wasn't backed by anything other than a feeling.
Well, he was completely, he was an economist that
Yeah.
had no real knowledge about like the problem with economists ultimately is they try to think in terms of strictly supply and demand, and they don't understand that housing is a abnormal. You can't think of housing like you do a stock. And
It's
so
not just an asset class. There's all these other things that affect housing.
exactly. And when you hear somebody that's never been in housing before, never been in housing at the level like we have before, and you hear them pontificating about housing, they're always going to approach it as if they were talking about, stock and Coca-Cola, and it
Right.
doesn't make any sense. But it's confusing. And again, so why are we telling you all this? Because we want you to take this information that we just gave you, and we want you to educate yourself primarily, and then we want you to be prepared to be on the other side of that tug rope with essentially mainstream media, because they're going to politicize whatever the new housing plan is called. We think it's going to be called Making Housing Great Again. And by the way, if we're right about that, all of you guys owe Julie and I a cup of coffee for having figured that one out. But we really do think it's called that. Or will be called that. We do believe it's going to be announced sometime in the next 30 days or less. We do believe, I'm not sure about the official release of the conservatorship, but it could be 30 days or less. There's going to be a tsunami of new housing focused conversations that will dominate the news cycle. Personally, I would be shocked if Trump didn't do it in timing it with the spring housing market. I think that seems like an opportunistic time to basically get some people already thinking about housing, right? I mean, that's sort of the seasonal time to really focus in on housing. And so he's going to time it. He is. This is speculative, of course, but we do believe that's what's going to happen. So get ahead of the curve. If you're at the gym and someone's talking about housing, take these points and use these points to kind of wow your prospective clients, because you're going to be approaching conversations at a level of expertise that you guys want to create a brand. Don't take more videos of you having your lunch and putting them on Instagram. How about you educate yourself so when you're actually talking to your prospective buyers and sellers, who are, by the way, everyone all the time, always around you,
Everywhere. Yeah.
everywhere, you're going to have a level of professionalism that other agents won't, because they're too busy creating their Instagram reels on how their golden retriever can catch a frisbee or whatever it is. You guys get the difference between what Julie and I are all about and what maybe you guys have been led to believe you're supposed to be all about. And I want to wrap today, Julie, with one final point. Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's partner, he passed away, said, "Don't try to make yourself famous. Try to make your work famous." That's not the exact quote, but it's pretty close. So if you think about what he's trying to say, don't seek fame, seek creating a product that's incredibly useful to other people. And maybe hopefully it's our podcast, it's our coaching program. Julie and I don't seek fame. We don't want to be famous. That's not something that we want. But what we want to do is we want to provide information through our business platform to make it so that you guys then can provide a higher level of service and have obviously incredible lives as a result and incredible businesses as a result. That is our objective. We don't want to be famous. How many of you have been manipulated into believing in order to be successful in life, in real estate in particular, that the new rule is that you have to somehow be an influencer or be famous? Yeah, don't waste any more time on that type of thinking, because if you really want to be famous, don't try to make yourself famous. Try to make the work product that you create famous. In other words, Julie's a great person, but oh my gosh, she does a fantastic job selling real estate. You guys get the difference? Focus on the result that you're here, the service you're here to provide for other people, and less on the narcissism that we've all been led to believe should be the pointing edge of our, lead generation spear every single day.
Very well said. I think that's the pod. Can't wrap
All
it
right,
up any
that's the
better than
pod.
that.
All right, good. So you guys have a fantastic day. Remember, if you're not already doing it, make sure you like and subscribe to this podcast. Thank you for all the great feedback. Oh, if you guys have any questions or show ideas, we did have some great show suggestions. The best place to do is messaging us over on Instagram. And you can message us on YouTube as well, but just Instagram is the place where we get all the messages right away. And that's at Tim and Julie Harris. And just message us any show ideas. I tell you, Julie, I had somebody that I took the video of you hanging and called Hanging with Julie and put it on Instagram and at the gym. And someone commented on the fact that they were same age as us and they wanted to get in shape and they want us to post more videos and talk about what we've been doing the last decade to get in shape. So maybe we should do that too.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, would it be fun? Would you want to do more hanging
After
with Julie?
doing it, not during. That's for sure.
All right. You guys have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.